Skull Sessions with Dan Henk. And why don't you tell me your name? Because I fuck everyone's name up.
Yeah, a lot of people wrestle with it. It's Scott Blasingame. It's actually pronounced just the way it's spelled.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right.
But
So,
I've heard some doozy pronunciations, that's for sure.
all right. Well, I probably would have been pretty close if I tried, but the time that you think you have it, you fuck it up. So, it's probably better if someone else says it. But all right, Scott. So let's talk about what you got going on.
Um, Presently, I'm working on a zombie trilogy. I've got the first book, the first draft of the first book written, and I'm working on the second one right now. Struggling a little bit with it because I've recently had some ideas for some other things, and so I've been making story notes for that stuff, and it's kind of pulling me away. But when it comes to writing, I'm a stickler as far as once I start a project, I I want to stay with it to completion. Otherwise, I'm afraid it'll get stuck on the back burner and I won't come back to it.
Okay. Do you have it all like written out and planned out in like notes or like a storyline before you start?
I do, and this is an idea that's gestated for a while, but so I've been kind of putting together characters and things that I want to happen within the course of the story, and so I I guess I started writing this one back at the first of the year, and probably the month of December, I sat down and started kind of outlining stuff. And I'm not a real stickler when it comes to outlining stuff. I give myself very broad bullet points, so to speak, as far as the order of things and how I want things to take place. But it helps me to stay on point that way. So I'm definitely a plotter as opposed to a pantser.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The first time I heard that, like I think a year ago, I interviewed somebody that said I'm a pantser. I'm like, you're a what? Like I never heard that. Like I came from originally I wanted to be a comic artist, so like the way a lot of like comic like the people I look up to, like Alan Moore, who Watchmen, he plots everything meticulously out, even draws like little cartoons of everything. Then he gives it to the artist. So
Yeah,
so I always thought like playing it all plotted out first. Like, when I write, like, it'll have like kind of like the rough, bulletin board of it, but then I might throw in more gore, I might throw in some conversation, whatever I help, at the spur of the moment, makes the story flow a little better. Is that
yeah,
kind of what you do?
yes, yes. I just want mainly like, okay, this is the event that's going to happen, and then here's the next event that's going to happen. And so then when I actually get to writing it, I give myself a little elbow room to play. I'm not super meticulous about outlining exactly everything I want to happen, but I do like to know where I'm going from place to place, and it helps me structure the story in that direction. Probably, probably the main thing I would say is when I sit down to really start, and I'm horrible. I mean, I write notes and jots of dialogue and descriptions and things like that, but those may be scattered all over the place. And at some point, I have to like put it all together in a Word doc for myself to kind of follow along. But one thing that's always helped me is I always know how I want the story to start. I always know how I want the story to end. It's just a matter of constructing things to get from point A to point Z, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I know that when I write, like I'll have like a scene, and then when I write it, I'm like, it doesn't grab me as much as it did in my head. So I like keep trying to rework it to make it like flow as smoothly as possible. Does
Right.
that you do the same thing?
I do. There's probably, I do pretty good about not having to do a whole lot of rewrites. I usually start coming across places uh, in the editing process, which I'll edit my stuff up to half a dozen times, and I'm always tweaking sentence structure or thinking I
You know,
meant to
I
comment
think that definitely helps.
this.
I hit it myself 3 times at
Yeah,
least.
yeah, and I'm always like, oh, I could have them say it this way instead, and that would have a little more dramatic effect. Or I meant to point out this particular aspect, or, ooh, it'd be cool if I really kind of described how when they got hit, how the blood spewed, or, just little things like that that I skipped initially. I go back and kind of hang a little more meat on the skeleton, so to speak.
Are you a little bit when you write a little more like item descriptive, kind of like a John Steinbeck, like Grapes of Wrath, like he'll describe like it'll be a sandstorm, and how gritty the sand is and everything else, and then you have people that are like very abstract, like they just kind of briefly touch on it.
Yeah. Uh, I I like detail, but that's me. Not I don't get like super gory because I don't ever want the reader to become inured to it or kind of become numb to it. So
Oh, you feel if you do it like too many times in a row, they'll be like, I already
yeah,
had that emotion.
yeah, exactly. So you want it to have that punch when they're reading it. Uh, so I try to save really specific details for moments like that. But I am detail oriented.
Okay. Do you concentrate? One thing that I concentrated later on that I learned to really appreciate in writers is the flow. Like Neil Gaiman is perfect at flow. Like when he started out, he's like a little bit more stiff, and now he starts to flow so smoothly. I mean, what I always say is he could write about a blank wall and still be interesting.
Mm-hmm. I find, yeah, flow is very important to me. And if I feel like if something's not working in the course of the scene, I definitely want to go back and address that, but also in segueing from scene to scene. Because there have been times where I've written stuff out, I've read through it a few times, and I'm like, it's just not clicking, but I don't want to get rid of the scene. And odds are it's just not in the right place. And
Okay.
so maybe it needs a little more of a bridge to get there. But definitely flow to me as a reader is very important. I hate feeling like I've just been picked up and dropped somewhere in a store.
Or it's just flat. It's like you don't
Yeah,
experience anything. I
yeah,
think one guy's really good at like making experiences like Cormac McCarthy, with like The Road, or are you
yeah,
familiar with him? Like
yes,
he just like him and like Neil Gaiman, like there's some people that just managed to make the words like just the whole thing kind of flow. So it doesn't even matter as much what they're talking about, as how they're saying it.
yeah. I would agree with that. I've always wanted to go back and read The Road. I've seen the movie, and dude, man, the movie is harsh. And
Yeah,
I hear that the book is even more bleak.
it
Uh,
is, but it's also I mean, like Cormac McCarthy has such a way with words that it impacts you more when he says it, and you like visualize it in your head. Then when you see like Vigo, Mortensen, he's the main character, but he for some reason he's just not as impactful as if you imagine the whole thing in your head.
yeah, I agree.
But he's an awesome actor, so nothing against him.
Mhm.
So I know that some people like they try and tone down certain things like the violence or the explicitness of certain scenes or whatever, depending on what they think their projected audience is. And some people they just like put it all out there. And then some people even go overboard and they try to like, shock their scene. How do you approach it?
It's I don't know. I waffle sometimes because there are certain writers that I like that really make the the idea of less is more really works sometimes. There's other times when, like I said, I'm a detail guy and I'm like, come on, you got to give me a little more than that. I don't get super detailed about gore, but I'm also not afraid to mention that, like I said, I'm writing a zombie book, and if a bunch of them drag somebody down and tear their chest open and start dragging organs and entrails out, well, I'm going to mention that, because to me, that's part of the terrifying aspect. I may not talk so much about how much they gorge themselves on that, but I think you can allude to things like that. Like if you see a zombie or a monster like that approaching, and the fact that they've got dried, matted blood all over them, you already kind of paint that image in the mind of the reader. So you don't really have to get expressly detailed in certain moments of gore. But sometimes I do think it's called for, and it is kind of fun to write,
I feel like it's kind of part of the flow when you like you kind of like get a little bit like more abstract with the what's going on, and then when it's like a shocking element like the zombie eating somebody, then all of a sudden you get like more descriptive because like it really like pulls them in.
Yes, yes. The other thing too is you've really got to let the scene kind of dictate that, because sometimes it's not always necessary for the scene, and other times it is. And I think sometimes you need to dictate that, or let the scene dictate that rather. And plus, you don't want to show all your cards right off the bat and delve into something like that with the first killing or whatever. You might want to build up to that to kind of build the tension, and then when the reader actually gets into it, and then holy cow,
It might be the same incident or a similar incident, but it's like as you go further along, it's described a little bit more viscerally, so it really
right,
grabs you.
yeah. And I do,
Your Go ahead.
well, I was going to say, and I do that with so I've written a couple of horror novels, but I do a lot of action adventure type stuff too, and a lot of it has martial arts styled action in it.
Oh,
And
awesome. Yeah, I do martial arts. What mainly do you write about?
I've got a superhero series called The Night Dragon. And so that's got some sci-fi elements to it, but it's got a lot of Eastern mysticism as well. And he's a street level hero, kind of like Daredevil and Batman. And so
So it's kind of, is that pull stuff together like the Matrix, where it's like, like hyper technology, but like kung fu or something.
it doesn't get quite that sci-fi. Some of the story, like the city I set them in, is called Nocturnity, and so that's a city that has a lot of technical corporations that are there, that are dealing with maybe genetics, or they could be dealing with cybernetics or things such as that I'll incorporate. But I don't get too heavy into those things. But like when I write the fight scenes for that, to me, it's like a good martial arts movie. You always kind of build up to the finale. But I
Okay.
like detail. I love detail in action scenes. Some people hate that. Some people are just like, that gets boring to read. And other people like me, I've had tell me, they're like, man, I feel like I'm in it. The way you describe stuff, like I'm standing right there. And that's the kind of detail that I really kind of enjoy.
Okay. Do you practice any certain martial arts? Do you have like fighting experts that like help you describe scenarios?
I don't. I've always been a kung fu movie buff. Back in my 30s, for about 10 years, I studied Northern Shaolin Kung Fu and Tai Chi. And that's made a distinct impression on me. And I still dabble around with it a little bit. One of the great things about my time when I was studying it was I got a real good knowledge of terminology and understanding of body mechanics, because one of the things that always aggravated me in reading a lot of fight scenes that people would write is that their sense of movement didn't make sense to me a lot of times. Like, well, how did he punch him in the face and then kick him in the head at the same time?
There's a lot of old Hollywood movies that are kind of similar. Yeah.
Yeah, and that always drove me nuts because I'm like, dude, the mechanics of the fight you're describing, nobody could do that. Right. So, but I carry a lot of that over when I get ready to write something like that. I may sit down and binge a bunch of movies just to get me in the mood, right. And put me in that mindset. But I'm not opposed to getting up in the kitchen and rehearsing moves to make sure they make sense before I write. You know,
it's probably something to see.
You know?
Yeah, I know. One thing I really liked is like Keanu Reeves brought in like MMA guys like and like gun experts for his scenes in John Wick, so he could like practice the moves and try and get them as right as possible. But like my dad's a big gun nut. He has the FL. He has literally 1,000 guns.
Oh my!
And it would always bug him when you see stuff like the 18 where they shoot like 20 shots, but it's a 6-shot revolver.
When did he reload? I missed that.
Well, and then they miss everybody all the time.
Yeah. Well,
there's a lot of stuff like nobody holds a gun like this. Nobody does. It'd break your fucking wrist, And like they'll have gun right here. Like, you know how loud these things are? Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff. We could go on for a while on that stuff.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's like what my wife's a nurse. And so if we sit down and they're doing a operating room scene or they're coding a patient or something on a show, she did this just the other night. She'll glance over at me and go, I'm not saying anything.
Sometimes not saying anything is saying something.
Yes. It can be.
Was she saying was her like insight was like it should be oriented slightly differently or should approach it or this is what happened? What happened?
I'm sorry, as far as what?
As far as your wife, just like I'm not saying anything. Did she read something that she's like, well, it wouldn't quite be like that, or she has some insight into it.
Yes. And she's a critical care nurse, so she deals with a lot of emergencies and things such as that. So, and she worked in the cardiac intensive care unit probably the first 10 years we were married. So she just, yeah, when it comes to medical stuff, she is a stickler, and she can ruin the moment when I'm thinking, just be quiet and let him stick the paddles to him.
Yeah, I remember like right now I own a tattoo shop, but before I worked like a bunch of like crappy like sort of 9 to 5 style jobs. And I remember a number of them I worked with EMTs. So some of my best stories I got from EMTs, like they just tell me craziness, and you're like, holy shit, I can't believe that happened.
Yeah. But I can do her the same way. If I did a little jaunt in the military back in the 80s, so sometimes when they're depicting military stuff on TV, I may pipe up. If my wife is an action movie fan, she is not a rom-com girl at all. And so if we're watching an action movie or a martial arts movie or something like that, I'm like, that was wholly unrealistic. She's just flicking me off, waving a hand at me to be quiet. So I guess
it's a slight diversion, but that recent Tarantino film where he kind of like I felt like he disrespects Bruce Lee in it. And I'm like, I'm a huge Bruce Lee fan. So I was like, that's not Bruce Lee.
And Once Upon a Time in Hollywood,
yeah.
I've been wanting to see that, and I still have not been able to catch that yet.
It is a good movie. I wouldn't say it's his best. Like I really like Django Unchained and Glorious Bastards and obviously Pulp Fiction, but it doesn't reach those heights. But I like it better than like his lower tier movies like The Hateful Eight.
yeah, I haven't seen The Hateful Eight either, and I keep meaning to watch that.
Yeah, I don't think that you're missing a lot. I'd say if you hadn't seen Django Unchained, you're missing it. But if you didn't see The Hateful, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I was not the fan of Pulp Fiction that a lot of people are. And I've watched it a few times. It's some odd storytelling, and somehow he kind of makes it work. But I don't know. I'm just not. To me, that's not one of his better movies. I love the Kill Bills, and I absolutely loved Inglorious Bastard.
I love Pulp Fiction. I saw it in the theaters though when it came out, and I was like, they don't do a lot like this. Like I really like what's that movie? I think it's Memento. It's like the one where he has like a brain like damage, and so he just writes notes so he remembers. Like he's looking for his wife's killer.
Right?
And like it's the same thing. Like it like jumps around in timelines and stuff, kind of like Pulp Fiction does.
Yeah,
I guess that was kind of like the cool things to do for a little while, but I thought when it was pulled off, it was clever.
I did too, and I've never made that connection before. But that's a really good point. Yeah, Memento is the way Christopher Nolan constructed that. That's a really good movie. I need to go back and rewatch that too.
But I think he's definitely a talent. Like obviously like Interstellar, The Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah.
But all right, so let's get back to you. So when you write your books, have you explored like doing first person? Do you do third person? Do you do present tense, past tense? Like how do you approach it?
I always do third person past tense. I've toyed with the idea of doing first person. I'm just not real. I don't know. I guess I should give it a try at some point in a short story just to see how well it fits me. But it's never been a viewpoint that's really intrigued me. Now, don't get me wrong. I love stories that are written from that perspective. I just don't know that that would be my strength. Uh, I'm much more comfortable writing third person.
I like I actually prefer first person, but I always try to like when something's going on, I try to put myself like in the head of the person experiencing it. So it's like this is what I would see, this is what I would do. So I try and describe it in like that scenario as opposed to that's what Ben did or that's what Dave did. But
Right.
everyone has a different approach, and like it can work as long as it's a well told story. It's a well told story.
Right. I agree.
So the currently you're working on a zombie series. Did you have stuff out prior to that?
I'm sorry.
Did like currently you're working on a zombie series, is that correct?
Yes.
And did you have stuff out prior to that?
Yes. I've got two horror novels. One of them is called The Act. It's about a stage magician who initially into his foray into the world of stage magic, he is like this huge failure. It's like his opening night up on stage, everything just it goes disastrous, for him. And but he winds up meeting a fellow and he makes a dark deal and he comes back after traveling abroad a number of years later and he is just this phenomenal stage magician now. But there are some underlying things that occur as a result of that. And I wrote the book in it's called The Act, and I wrote it in three acts. Where the first third of the book is the starting act. That's when he's like the opener. The second part is called the starring act, and that's where he's the headliner. And then the final third is called the sinister act, and that's where the whole story, what he's done, what he's involved himself in, all comes out and comes to a
It kind
head.
of catches up with him and all comes crashing down.
Yes,
Cool.
yes.
And is that available on like Amazon or Barnes and Nobles?
It is. It's available on Amazon as print or as an ebook.
Okay, and what's the other one? Didn't you say you have two as well?
Yes, sir. The other one is called Wolf and Witch, and that's kind of a different take on the werewolf lore in that um, it's a wolf that is bitten by another werewolf, and he turns into a man, and so he's got to be housebroken beside
That's
his.
kind of a clever differentiation. Yeah.
So I really had a lot of fun with that. It's got some comical aspects to it, but it doesn't skip on the horror and the gore either. Uh, and it's the witch part comes in is a young lady. It just so happens that one of her best friends in high school is part of this werewolf pack, and they come to her for help, and so she kind of helps in his education along the way. And there's a fella that has arrived into town, and he prides himself as a hunter, not just of animals or beasts in particular, but supernatural creatures. And he has tracked this pack of werewolves to that town, and he's trying to hunt them down. So it's really neat. It's got some overtones and some aspects of Native American lore in it, but also some Greek and Roman mythology in it as well.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I see a lot of the what I think are the best, strongest stories have like other elements of like old fables and old lore, involved. Like that's what George Lucas did with Star Wars. He has like, how much backstory he has from like legends and lore and tales and all that in it.
Yeah.
And that's what I think made his early stuff strong. But we not his later stuff, but that's not even his. Like Disney bought it, then I don't even want to talk what they did with it. Like in my opinion, that's it's like there are bands like that too. Like they put in a couple albums and then they turn to crap, and I'm like, I'll just pretend they died.
Yeah.
Like that was a line for them.
I'm that way. I usually really, when I find a new band that I like, I'm like, well, their first album is good. And then it's like their sophomore album is really rocking. And then the next album, I'm like, well, yeah, that's kind of good. And then after that, I'm like, okay, I got to find somebody new to listen to
Yeah, it's
now.
true. Well, there are some bands that like I don't know if that was because they felt they had changed their style or whatever, but they'll put out a couple albums that'll be awesome, and then they're a different band, and that's not the band that I wanted to buy an album for.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, yeah, that's all I count them as having like broken up and reformed as someone else.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel the same way. Uh, Def Leppard to me is a classic example. Their first album is fantastic. Their second album, High and Dry, dude, that I think that's one of the best albums ever made. But it's their third album, Pyromania, that put them over the top. And yeah, there's some great songs on there, but to me, it really didn't have the rawness of the second album. And then, you gotta remember what they wound up going through with their drummer being in a wreck and losing his arm and everything. And
Right.
when they came back with Hysteria, that was so highly anticipated, and it's a strong album, but to me it is so overproduced that it kind of ruins some of the magic that they had as a result. But that's me. I don't want to offend any of your other viewers.
Well, it's like, like I like Def Leppard like back in the day, but then I got into like way heavy music. So like I remember like the early Metallicas and early Slayers, or
Yeah.
early Megadeth, and like that's my passion. But it's like, I feel like a lot of those bands are the same thing. It's like, they put out some masterpieces and then they totally dropped off.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I can see that with Metallica after I enjoyed Master of Puppets and Justice for All and even the Black Album. And then, but it was like after the Black Album, they always said they wouldn't go commercial, but yeah, you kind of did a little bit. And
well, they did a lot. I
yeah,
feel like actually through Injustice for All, I like them, and then I just feel like they just are different man after that. Because like even the Black Album, like they're trying to go way more rock. They're trying to simplify stuff.
Yeah, yeah. They got a little bit more the bluesy and stuff. And I think that's because Hetfield and Lars, the drummer, started letting their guitarist, Kirk Hammett, started letting him contribute more. And I've seen in interviews where he's talked about some of his influence were blues guys. And so he started bringing more of that to the songwriting. Whereas before, Hetfield had always been kind of dictatorial about this is the riff, play it this way. I want the lead to sound like this. And yeah.
Well, they totally jumped the shark, and they did first Reload and Load and Reload. Then they did Saint Anger, which is probably one of the worst albums I've ever heard. But that's another issue. All right, man. So I won't keep you here all day. Why don't you give me a couple of recommendations if you can, like what people should check out, and then we'll go through how to get a hold of you and give you money and buy your shit.
Okay. Well, like we talked about, if they are into horror, I've got The Act and Wolf and Witch. And Wolf and Witch is meant to be an ongoing series. I've only written the first book for that. If they want just some cool action adventure, Eastern mysticism kind of stuff, I've got the Night Dragon series, which is superhero based, but that's got a really cool cast of characters. I've done an epic trilogy called The Warrior Son, and that's complete. It's epic fantasy. It's about tribes of people that are only 12 inches tall, but they ride foxes and hawks, and there's an evil snake tribe, but it's got a lot of political intrigue, romance, and action to it. And then I've been dipping my toe into crime noir. And so I've got this private investigator guy who is, I like to refer to him as a cleaner version of Ryan Reynolds. He's very snarky. His mouth gets him in trouble. And he usually has to duke his way out of things. And I've got a couple of books that are collections of short stories of him. So you start reading those and you're already in a situation, or he's gotten himself in trouble and he's got to finagle his way out of it.
I do think that Ryan Reynolds is a real treasure. He's awesome. But all right, man. So, do you have a website? Do you have links where people can see you? Like, are you on social media, like Twitter and like maybe TikTok, doing little dances?
Yes, my my author's Facebook page is Scott Blasingame -author, and I have a website that is called nocturnitybookstore.com, and everything will direct you back to Amazon. I self-publish on there, and so that's pretty much the outlet that you'll go to in order to make any purchases. And like I said, everything is available as an ebook and as a paperback.
Okay, and do you have do you have an Instagram or
I do
Twitter?
not. I do not, and I
I
don't
know
know.
you have a Facebook because I got a hold of you on Facebook.
Yeah, and that seems to be. I'm not a social media guy, and that seems to be about all I can manage.
Well, I feel like I do all of them because I'm like, I'm in the arts, so I feel I have to. But if you don't have to, even better. It is a lot of work.
Yeah. Well, I would probably. I probably ought to look in using one of the two of those at least to try to generate some more attention for my work and gain some more readers and stuff. I'm just, most authors are horrible at self-promotion, and
Oh, I
it is
know.
because we
Yeah.
hate having to do it.
One thing that really seems to be taken off, if it doesn't get banned, is TikTok. Like
Yeah.
I see Jeff Strand all the time. He's been like posting like crazy, and like he has very energetic commercials for books and stuff. Like Attack of the Killer Tomatoes is getting pelted by tomatoes the whole time. I was holding a copy. Yeah. But all right, so do you have anything else that you want to add? Anything else you want to say?
Nothing off the top of my head other than the fact that I appreciate you inviting me and taking the time to talk with me. And I've been listening to some of your earlier podcast stuff. I absolutely love the interviews that you did starting out with Stephen Bissett.
Oh,
Uh,
awesome. Yeah.
but
He's
I
one of
like
my inspirations. Yeah.
I like your interview style too. You are very, very knowledgeable about things, and you don't just ask the typical questions. And it's fun to kind of riff on stuff with you. So that's cool.
Well, thank you. Yeah, yeah, I try to do that because you know, I've done a lot of interviews for people, especially like I had my 15 minutes of fame in like the tattoo world. So people interview me, they always have the exact same questions. It's like a
Yeah.
formula. I'm like, dude, come on. Can't you think of anything? But yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you.